Tehran has more cameras per square kilometer than almost any city on Earth. The Iranian government built that network to watch its own people. What no one asked, until it was too late, is whether someone else could watch through those same cameras in real time from 2,000 miles away. In the mid-2010s, someone did exactly that. His name, in the operational record, is Dov. He is not a field operative in the traditional sense. He does not carry a weapon. He does not run assets through dead drops in back alleys. Dov is a technical architect, the kind of intelligence officer who spends months designing something that someone else will physically execute in 4 minutes. He thinks in systems. He thinks in failure modes. And in the spring of 2015, he was given a problem that had no clean solution. Israel's visibility into Tehran had collapsed. Not suddenly. Gradually, the way these things always happen. An asset arrested here, a communication channel burned there, a safe house identified, a courier route compromised. By 2015, Mossad's ground-level intelligence picture of Tehran, the city where Iran's most sensitive nuclear and military decisions were being made, had more gaps than coverage. Satellite imagery helped, but only in short windows. The Iranians had learned to time sensitive movements around orbital paths. They were patient, they were disciplined, and they were winning the visibility war. Dov had been studying Iran's domestic surveillance architecture for nearly 2 years when he noticed something that the people who built it had never considered a vulnerability. Tehran's camera network was large, but it was not original. Iran had not engineered it from the ground up. Large portions of the infrastructure ran on commercial hardware, systems sourced from Chinese and South Korean manufacturers, sold to dozens of countries, installed by contractors who used standardized configuration protocols. The outward-facing security of the network was solid. Iranian engineers had layered authentication requirements and access controls on the parts of the system visible from outside, but the internal maintenance interfaces, the administrative layer used by technicians doing routine upkeep, had not been hardened to the same standard. The assumption baked into the system's design was simple. Anyone accessing those interfaces would have to be physically present on the local network. A closed loop, secure by geography. Dov's insight was not that this assumption was wrong. It was that you could make it wrong, with the right hardware, inserted in the right place. He designed a device, small enough to fit in a jacket pocket, passive enough to sit dormant for up to 4 days after insertion without drawing a single alert. Once activated, it would mirror a selected portion of the camera feed data, encrypt it, and transmit short compressed bursts through a commercial cellular channel, packets designed to look like ordinary network diagnostics, the kind of low-level traffic that flows through telecommunications infrastructure constantly, invisibly, without triggering any flag. The device would not hack the network. It would not break anything. It would simply listen, compress, encrypt, and whisper outward over and over for as long as it stayed in place. On paper, it was elegant. Dov knew better than to trust elegant. The first problem was physical. The device required someone to open a network junction box in Tehran and plug it in. That meant a person with access, with a reason to be there, who would not attract attention. Mossad identified a candidate through a chain of intermediary contacts that had taken months to develop. A Lebanese-born telecommunications contractor, Iranian work authorization, an active maintenance contract with the Tehran Municipal Communications Authority, which gave him scheduled, documented, legitimate access to exactly the kind of junction boxes Dov needed. He had worked adjacent to Western intelligence networks before, not Israeli ones specifically, but close enough that a careful approach was possible. In the operational record, he is Parrot. Dov met Parrot twice in Istanbul. The first meeting was evaluation. The second was instruction. Dov couriered the device into Turkey himself, traveling under a European alias with a documented history of successful prior use. He handed Parrot the hardware along with a single laminated reference card and one abort condition. If any maintenance log showed the target junction box had been opened in the previous 72 hours, Parrot was to leave without inserting the device. Parrot flew back to Tehran 3 days later. What Dov did not know, what Mossad's vetting process had not surfaced, was that Parrot had a brother, and the brother had spent 3 months in Iranian intelligence custody in 2019 before being released under conditions that were never documented. That detail was sitting in a file somewhere, unread, unflagged. The target junction box was on Vali-e Asr Avenue, one of Tehran's longest and most central roads, running north to south through the heart of the city. From that single insertion point, the device would have data range covering 3 high-priority surveillance zones that Mossad had been trying to see into for years. Parrot's scheduled maintenance visit was 7 days out. In Tel Aviv, Dove's team ran final checks on the receiving architecture, a relay node in Cyprus designed to accept the encrypted bursts, strip the outer layer, and forward the decrypted feed to a secure analysis facility. The system had been tested against identical hardware in a controlled environment. It had performed correctly every time. Dove signed off on the operation. Then he sat down and wrote a 1-page risk summary that his chain of command would later describe as overly cautious. In it, he noted that the device had never been tested inside a live Iranian network environment, that Parrot's reliability under operational pressure was unconfirmed, and that any expansion of the program beyond the initial insertion would require a separate authorization review. The summary was filed. Whether anyone read it carefully before the operation expanded is a question the record does not answer. 7 days later, Parrot walked into a junction box on Vali E. Asser Avenue with a maintenance toolkit and a device the size of a thick credit card. He was inside for under 4 minutes. What happened in those 4 minutes and what Mossad thought it had built versus what it had actually built would not become clear for another 8 months. 47 hours after Parrot walked out of that junction box, the first encrypted burst arrived at the Cyprus relay node. 11 hours after that, decrypted footage from Tehran's Vali A. Asser camera cluster was playing on a monitor in a secure facility outside Tel Aviv. For 3 weeks, everything worked exactly as designed. And that was the first thing that should have worried Dove. The footage was not dramatic. There were no missiles, no secret convoys, no visible evidence of anything that would make a headline. What it showed was ordinary life on one of Tehran's busiest corridors, traffic, pedestrians, street vendors, the rhythm of a city that had no idea it was being watched from 2,000 miles away. But ordinary life, observed persistently and systematically, stops being ordinary very quickly. Within the first 10 days, analysts had identified 7 vehicles with registration patterns that cross-referenced against known IRGC personnel files. They had mapped a recurring meeting pattern at a private residential building in the Eila Haya district, a building that had never appeared in any previous intelligence product. They had noted that a specific individual, a mid-level figure in Iran's nuclear oversight bureaucracy, walked the same route to the same tea house every Tuesday and Thursday morning, arriving within a 4-minute window with almost no variation. Behavioral mapping is slow intelligence. It does not give you a secret. It gives you a structure, a picture of how people actually move through the world when they believe no one is watching. And a structure, built carefully over weeks, is worth more than any single intercepted communication. Tel Aviv was pleased. The request came back quickly. Expand the coverage. Dove pushed back. Not loudly, that was not his style, but clearly. His original design had been built around a single insertion point, a single device, a single data channel. Every additional device multiplied the attack surface. Every additional insertion required Parrot to make another visit, create another maintenance log entry, take another risk. The operation had been designed to be small precisely because small things are hard to find. He was told the first insertion had worked. The risk model had been validated. 2 additional junction boxes had been identified, one near the Lavazan district, one near a government complex in central Tehran, and the coverage they would provide was, according to the analysis team, operationally significant. Dove asked for a formal risk review before any expansion. He was told there wasn't time. Parrot made the second insertion 6 weeks after the first. The third came 4 weeks after that. Both succeeded. The camera feed expanded. The data flowing into Cyprus grew. The analysis facility in Tel Aviv added staff, and then the operation created a problem it had never been designed to survive. The data volume had grown large enough that it required a dedicated processing allocation inside the Israeli intelligence infrastructure. Dedicated allocations require budget codes. Budget codes appear in administrative systems. Administrative systems get audited. A routine internal security review, the kind that runs quarterly across all intelligence processing infrastructure, flagged an anomalous data allocation that did not match any officially registered program identifier. The flag was not hostile, it was procedural. A junior administrator had simply noticed that a significant and growing chunk of processing capacity was assigned to a code that did not appear in the master program registry. An inquiry was opened. Dov found out on a Tuesday afternoon from a colleague who had seen the inquiry notice and recognized the processing signature. He had approximately 72 hours before the inquiry would escalate to a level that required a formal response from his chain of command, meaning people who had not been read into the operation would start asking questions about it. He spent the next 40 hours trying to determine whether the inquiry itself had generated any external signals, any communications about it, any records that could have been observed by a hostile service. He could not confirm that it hadn't. This is where Dov's original risk summary, the one his chain of command had described as overly cautious, begins to read differently. He had written, in the third paragraph, that any program expansion would require a separate authorization review. He had written it because he understood something about institutional behavior that operational enthusiasm tends to obscure. The moment a program produces results, it stops belonging to the people who designed it. It gets absorbed into a larger appetite, and larger appetites do not stay invisible. The inquiry was manageable. The operations security team was confident it could be resolved without exposure. The program code would be retroactively registered, the allocation explained as a signals processing initiative, the administrator's question answered with just enough to close the inquiry without revealing anything real. But manageable is not the same as safe. And Dov knew there was now a second audience for this operation, an internal one, inside the Israeli intelligence bureaucracy, that had not been anticipated and could not be fully controlled. He requested an abort discussion. The meeting was small, 4 people in a room, no notes taken in any form that would be retained. Dov made his case methodically. The internal inquiry had created a new exposure vector. The program had expanded beyond its original design parameters. Parrot had made 3 insertions, 3 times more human contact with Iranian infrastructure than the original operation had called for. Each insertion was another opportunity for something to have been observed, logged, or reported by someone Parrot had encountered. The counter-argument was straightforward, and, from a purely operational standpoint, not unreasonable. The program was working. The behavioral mapping had already identified targets and patterns that years of previous collection had failed to produce. There was a specific, time-sensitive intelligence objective now within reach, a procurement advisor in the nuclear oversight structure whose courier meeting pattern had been mapped to a predictable window 9 to 14 days away. If the program was terminated now, that window closed permanently. The collection already gathered would remain, but incomplete, a partial picture with no way to finish it. Dov asked what the plan was if the inquiry could not be contained at the administrative level. He was told it would be contained. He asked what the plan was if Parrot had been observed during any of the 3 insertions. He was told that Parrot's operational security had been clean across all 3 visits. The maintenance logs were consistent. There had been no unusual contact from Iranian authorities with the contractor firm. Dov said that the absence of a visible problem was not evidence that a problem did not exist. He said it precisely that way, and the room was quiet for a moment afterward. The decision was made to extend the operation. 3 weeks maximum, long enough to capture the courier meeting. Then a clean termination, devices pulled, channel closed, program ended. Dov's objection was noted. It was put in writing, at his insistence. He left the meeting knowing 2 things. The first was that the 3-week extension would not stay 3 weeks. It never did. The moment a specific intelligence objective was in sight, timelines became negotiable in one direction only. The second thing he knew, or had begun to suspect, though he could not yet prove it, was that something about the operation's history did not add up. 3 successful insertions, a program that had been running for months. No alerts, no anomalies, no contact from Iranian security services. Clean maintenance logs. A cooperative asset who had performed exactly as expected every time. Dov had spent his career designing systems and studying failure modes. He knew what a system looked like when it was working well. He also knew what a system looked like when someone wanted you to think it was working well. The difference, from the inside, was almost impossible to detect. He went back to his desk and pulled Parrot's vetting file. Not the summary, the full file. He was looking for something he couldn't name yet. A gap, an inconsistency, a single detail that hadn't been weighted correctly when the asset was approved. He found it on page 11. Parrot had a brother. The brother's name was not in the summary. It was buried in a source note on page 11 of the raw vetting file. attached to a 3-line entry that described a 2019 detention by Iranian intelligence as a collateral reference, a background context about Parrot's family circumstances, included not because anyone considered it significant, but because the field officer who compiled the file had been thorough enough to note it existed. The detention had lasted approximately 3 months. The brother had been released. The circumstances of the release were listed as unknown. Dov read that phrase 3 times. Unknown. Not unconfirmed, not pending. Unknown, meaning no one had looked. He flagged it to the operations security team that same evening and requested an immediate background pull on the brother's release circumstances. He was told it would take several days to run through the relevant channels. He asked for it to be expedited. He was told the extension was already in motion and that Parrot had been signaled for the courier window operation. The machinery was already moving. Dov's flag was logged and placed in a queue. The courier window was estimated at 9 to 14 days. The behavioral mapping had identified a pattern. The procurement advisor left his residence in the late morning, traveled a consistent route toward the Valley A. Asser corridor, and made contact with a vehicle matching the courier profile at a location the cameras could cover cleanly. The meeting lasted between 20 and 40 seconds each time. An exchange, a package, the vehicle continuing north. The analysis team wanted a clean visual capture, timestamp verified, both parties in frame, the exchange itself visible. That was the objective. Everything else was secondary. For the first 4 days of the extension, nothing happened. The advisor made his Tuesday morning tea house walk. He returned. He did not deviate. The courier vehicle did not appear in any of the camera zones. On the 5th day, a vehicle matching the courier profile appeared on the Valley A. Asser feed. Wrong time of day, wrong direction of travel, and it passed the target location without stopping. The analysis team flagged it as a possible dry run or route check. Dov looked at the same footage and said it was probably a different vehicle with a similar registration pattern and that the team was seeing what it wanted to see. He was right. The vehicle was unrelated. But the episode mattered because of what it produced. A decision to widen the monitoring window and increase the frequency of footage review, which required additional personnel access to the decrypted feed, which created additional internal records. Each expansion of access was another thread. Dov counted them and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say that he had not already said in writing. On the 9th day, the extension nearly ended before it produced anything. A routine check of the Cypress relay node showed a gap in the incoming data stream, approximately 4 hours, where the bursts from the Valley A. Asser device had simply stopped. Not degraded, stopped completely. The operations team's first interpretation was equipment failure. The devices had been designed for durability but not indefinite deployment. 11 months of continuous operation was beyond the original design threshold. A hardware fault was plausible. Dov's interpretation was different. A hardware fault would typically produce degraded or irregular transmission before a full stop. A clean stop, with no degradation pattern, was more consistent with either a physical interruption, someone had opened the junction box, or a deliberate signal block on the cellular channel the device used for transmission. He requested an immediate stand-down. No further personnel access to the feed. No communications about the gap through any channel that had not been used before this moment. He wanted 48 hours to assess before anyone made a decision about the operation's status. The request was partially granted. Access was restricted, but the assessment window was cut to 18 hours because the estimated courier meeting window was now between 0 and 5 days away, and a stand-down of any length risked missing it entirely. 14 hours into the assessment, the data stream resumed. The operations team treated this as confirmation of a hardware fault, a temporary interruption, self-resolved, consistent with an aging device in a variable cellular environment. Relief moved through the team quickly, the specific relief of a problem that had answered itself. Dov did not feel it. A hardware fault that self-resolves after 14 hours, with no degradation on either side of the gap, matched no failure mode he had designed for. He wrote a second internal note. He described the gap as unexplained, not resolved. He recommended termination. He was told the stream was back. The operation was continuing. 3 days later, the courier meeting happened. It was a Thursday morning. The procurement advisor left his residence 12 minutes earlier than his established pattern, a small deviation, but enough that the analysis team almost missed the vehicle positioning. A camera operator caught it on a secondary feed and flagged it upward in time. The visual sequence lasted 23 seconds. The advisor's vehicle slowed near a side street off Valley A. Asser. A second vehicle, matching the courier profile precisely, same registration pattern that had been mapped across 6 previous appearances in the data, stopped briefly alongside it. A figure leaned from the courier vehicle toward the advisor's window. Something passed between them. The courier vehicle pulled away and continued north. The footage was clean. Both subjects were identifiable. The timestamp was verified. The exchange was visible. The analysis team's assessment came back within hours. Confirmed procurement contact, consistent with all prior behavioral mapping, high confidence on both individuals. In the secure facility outside Tel Aviv, for approximately 6 hours, the operation felt finished. The objective had been met. The footage existed. The 3-week extension had produced exactly what it had been extended to produce. Dov reviewed the footage twice and said the operation needed to terminate within 24 hours. He was told the termination was already being scheduled. The devices would be pulled, Parrot would be signaled, the channel would be closed. For those 6 hours, the operation felt like it had landed safely. The tension of the previous weeks compressed into something that resembled, briefly, resolution. Then the background pull on Parrot's brother came back. The report was 4 paragraphs. The brother had been detained in connection with a smuggling matter that Iranian intelligence had investigated and, apparently, declined to prosecute. He had been released after 93 days. The release had been facilitated by a written agreement, the contents of which were partially reconstructed from a secondary source. The agreement required the brother to report any contact with foreign nationals who expressed interest in Iranian telecommunications infrastructure. That was the line, buried in paragraph 3. Buried. Contact with foreign nationals expressing interest in Iranian telecommunications infrastructure. Dov read it and understood immediately that the 4-hour data gap 9 days earlier had not been a hardware fault. Someone had opened the junction box. They had looked at the device. They had closed the box again and allowed the stream to resume. They had known about the device, possibly for weeks, possibly from the beginning. And the courier meeting, the clean, time-stamped, perfectly framed 23 seconds of footage that the operation had been extended 11 weeks to capture, had happened 3 days after someone had physically examined the device and put it back. Dov picked up the internal line and asked for an emergency termination authorization. He was already thinking about what it meant that the footage looked exactly like what Mossad had needed to see. Clean subjects, clear exchange, high confidence identification. Everything in frame. Intelligence that arrives exactly as needed after the operation's security has been compromised is not necessarily intelligence. It may be a message. The termination authorization came through within the hour. Parrot was contacted through the prearranged dead drop signal and instructed to perform one final maintenance visit, not to insert anything, but to remove the devices, or failing that, to trigger the physical destruction mechanism built into each module that would render the hardware unreadable and chemically degrade the circuit architecture within 40 seconds of activation. Parrot acknowledged the signal. He never made the visit. But 24 hours passed. Then 48. Parrot's work phone went offline sometime during the first night. His registered residential address in Tehran showed no activity across any of the monitoring channels still available to the operations team. His contractor firm, when a cutout contact made a careful inquiry, listed him as having taken unscheduled personal leave. No forwarding information. No return date. The operations team's initial read was that Parrot had run, that he had understood the termination signal as confirmation that the operation was compromised, panicked, and gone to ground on his own initiative. This was not unprecedented. Assets under pressure sometimes disappeared before their handlers intended them to, driven by a self-preservation instinct that overrode protocol. Dov did not accept this interpretation, not because it was implausible, but because it was convenient. It explained Parrot's absence in a way that kept the operation's failure contained. A single asset who lost his nerve, a loose end that would eventually resolve itself one way or another. What it did not explain was the junction box. If Parrot had simply run, the devices were still in place, still potentially transmitting, or appearing to transmit, into a channel that the Cyprus node had now gone dark on from the Israeli side. The question of what the devices were doing and who was receiving what they sent had no answer that could be confirmed from Tel Aviv. The Cyprus relay node was shut down within hours of Parrot's disappearance being confirmed. The Tel Aviv analysis facility was isolated. Every record associated with the program was placed under emergency compartmentalization, access restricted to a list of 7 people, all of whom had been inside the operation from the beginning. The 3 devices in Tehran, if they were still physically in place, were now dark from the Israeli side. What they were transmitting on the Iranian side remained unknown. The internal inquiry that had been quietly resolved 6 weeks earlier was reopened, not because the original flag had been re-examined, but because the emergency compartmentalization of the program had generated its own administrative signature, a sudden, sharp restriction on a processing allocation that had previously been growing. Restrictions of that kind, applied that quickly, draw attention in the same way that anomalous growth does. A different administrator, a different set of questions. This time, the resolution took 3 weeks and required a formal briefing to a senior oversight figure who had not previously been read into the program. The briefing was carefully constructed. It described the program in past tense, as a completed collection initiative that had been terminated following a routine operational review. It did not describe Parrot. It did not describe the junction box examination. It did not raise the possibility that the courier footage had been staged. The oversight figure accepted the briefing. The inquiry was closed. Dov was not in the room for the briefing. He was told afterward what had been said. He did not comment on the characterization of the termination as routine. He was reassigned within the month. A lateral move, different portfolio, equivalent seniority, no formal disciplinary record attached to the transfer. His written objections remained in the file. Whether they protected him or simply documented the distance he had tried to maintain from the decisions that followed his recommendations, the record does not resolve. The procurement advisor identified in the Valley A. Asser footage the man whose courier exchange had been the operation's final objective died in a vehicle accident on a highway in northern Tehran approximately 14 months after the program's termination. Iranian state media reported it as a traffic fatality. A truck had drifted across the median barrier. The advisor's vehicle had been struck on the driver's side. He had died at the scene. No government commented on the death. No intelligence service publicly claimed any involvement. Whether the Valley A. Asser footage had informed any downstream action, whether the contamination question had been resolved in favor of the intelligence's validity, or whether someone had decided the question didn't matter, is not established by anything in the available record. What is established is the sequence, a 19-month collection program, a decision to extend it against a written objection, a compromised asset, footage that arrived cleanly after the compromise had been discovered, and a man dead 14 months later under circumstances that produced no official explanation. Each of those facts exists independently. What connects them, if anything does, exists in a part of the record that is not available. Iranian counterintelligence published nothing about this operation. They rarely do. Public acknowledgement of a penetration, even one that was detected and managed, carries its own costs. It tells the other side what you found. It tells them how you found it. It tells them which of their assets you identified and which you missed. It closes doors that an agency may still find useful to leave open, because a door you know about is a door you can control. Silence, in counterintelligence, is not the absence of a response. It is often the most deliberate response available. What Iran almost certainly did, in the weeks following the junction box examination, was study the hardware carefully. The device Dov had designed was not sophisticated by the standards of offensive cyber tools that had been intentional, but its simplicity made it easier to reverse engineer, not harder. The insertion methodology, the specific port configuration it was built around, the cellular transmission pattern designed to mimic routine diagnostic traffic, the rolling encryption key structure, all of it would have been extractable from a physical examination of an intact device. Iranian engineers with access to the same commercial hardware the network ran on could have reconstructed the full operational picture within days. That reconstruction would not have been kept inside a single department. It would have moved through the technical divisions of Iranian counterintelligence into the teams responsible for infrastructure hardening, and eventually into the procurement and configuration standards applied to future network maintenance. Every junction box that matched the profile Dov had targeted would have been inventoried. Every maintenance interface that had been left in a partially open configuration would have been reviewed. The specific administrative layer vulnerability that had made the insertion possible, the gap between the network's outward-facing security and its internal maintenance protocols would have been identified, documented, and closed, not immediately. These things take time, and large infrastructure networks do not get reconfigured overnight. But the process would have begun the moment the device was examined. And once a vulnerability is known to the defending side, the clock on its usefulness runs in one direction only. The deeper consequence was not the closure of a single vulnerability. It was the education of an adversary. Before this operation, Iranian counterintelligence understood that foreign intelligence services might attempt to access their surveillance network from outside, through digital intrusion, through signal interception, through the kinds of remote exploitation that had defined the Stuxnet era. They had built defenses against those approaches. What they had not fully considered was the physical layer. The possibility that the network's weakest point was not its software or its communications architecture, but the physical hardware sitting in maintenance boxes on street corners across the city, accessible to anyone with a contractor badge and a scheduled visit. This operation told them to think about that layer. To treat physical access to network infrastructure as an intelligence threat, not just a maintenance logistics question, to monitor contractor movements more carefully, to cross-reference maintenance logs against personnel security files, to treat the routine as a potential vector. Every future operation of this type, not just Israeli operations, but any foreign intelligence effort targeting urban surveillance infrastructure in a hardened environment, became measurably more difficult the moment this one ended. The insertion method that Dov had spent months designing, that had run silently for the better part of 2 years, was now a known approach inside Iranian counterintelligence. Known approaches get briefed to defensive teams. Defensive teams build detection protocols around them. Detection protocols get tested, refined, and eventually institutionalized. The architectural gap that had made Tehran's surveillance network observable from outside its borders was, at some point after this operation, sealed. The specific gap Dov had found and exploited would never be available in the same form again. There is a particular kind of intelligence loss that agencies find difficult to account for, because it does not appear in any damage assessment as a line item. It is not a burned asset, not a compromised communication channel, not a list of names that the other side now holds. It is the loss of a method, a way of doing something that worked precisely because it had never been done before, and that stops working the moment it has been. Methods, once exposed, do not just stop working against the specific target that detected them. They stop working everywhere, against every adversary that shares intelligence with the one that made the discovery. Iran and its partners, Russia, certain factions within Chinese intelligence, various proxy networks, maintain technical information sharing relationships of varying depth. A hardware insertion methodology, reverse engineered from a device recovered in Tehran, does not necessarily stay in Tehran. It becomes part of a broader counterintelligence knowledge base, shared selectively, but shared nonetheless. Dov had designed something original. In the intelligence world, original methods are the scarcest resource there is. They exist in a narrow window between the moment of conception and the moment of detection, and once that window closes, it cannot be reopened. You cannot unexpose a method. You cannot make an adversary forget what they learned from examining your hardware. Mossad had demonstrated that it was possible to turn Iran's own cameras against it. The demonstration cost them the ability to do it again. In demonstrating that, they taught Iran precisely how to prevent it, and taught every intelligence service that received the briefing exactly what to look for in their own infrastructure. What this operation produced, in the end, was a trade that no one had explicitly authorized. 19 months of behavioral mapping, one piece of footage with an unresolved contamination question, and a methodology that is now part of the defensive knowledge of at least one major adversary, exchanged for an extension that lasted 11 weeks longer than anyone had agreed to, an asset whose fate remains unknown, and a written objection that sits in a file somewhere, noted and overruled. Whether that trade was worth making is a question that intelligence agencies ask in internal reviews that are never published. Whether it was ever asked in this case, and what answer it received, belongs to the part of this story that remains inaccessible. What is accessible is the shape of the decision. A program that worked, extended past its safe boundary because it was working. A risk that was flagged, logged, and set aside because the objective was close. A success that arrived exactly when it was needed, after the compromise had already happened. Tehran does not announce when it wins. It simply waits for the other side to trust the wrong thing at the wrong time, and then it makes sure that the thing they trusted looks exactly like what they were hoping to find. The courier footage sits somewhere in an intelligence archive, time-stamped and verified, flagged with a contamination question that was never formally resolved. Intelligence with an unresolved contamination question does not disappear. It circulates. Analysts who encounter it in future assessments must decide individually how much weight to give it without full knowledge of the circumstances that produced it. A piece of intelligence that may have been allowed to be collected, that may have been designed to be seen, quietly shapes analysis in ways that cannot be fully traced or corrected. That is perhaps the most durable cost of what happened on Vali A. Asser Avenue. Not the lost network, not the burned methodology, not even Parrot, wherever he is. The footage exists. It looks exactly like what Mossad needed to see, and no one can say with certainty whether it was real or whether it was a careful performance staged for cameras that Tehran already knew were being watched. Dov designed a system to watch a city. What he could not design for was the possibility that the city was watching back, not trying to stop the operation, but trying to complete it, letting it run, letting it produce, letting it feel like success, right up until the moment that the success itself became the message. Tehran does not announce when it wins. It simply waits for the other side to trust the wrong thing at the wrong time. The cameras are still there. The junction boxes are still accessible. The network is still running. The difference now is that someone on both sides of the border knows exactly how that network can be used against itself, and exactly how to make sure that the next time someone tries, they see only what they are meant to see. That is what this operation left behind. Not a solved problem. Not a broken network. A permanent question mark attached to a piece of intelligence that shaped decisions and a methodology that can never be used the same way again. Hidden Ops covers the operations that don't make headlines, the ones where the outcome is still unclear years later. If that's the kind of analysis you're here for, subscribe. A new operation drops every week.